London at Home presents 10 London sporting events that you've probably never even heard of. Number 10 is the race against Big Ben. In the early 20th century, it was a tradition for the House of Commons staff to attempt to race against Big Ben across Westminster Bridge before the chimes at noon stopped. That's 353 metres in about 50 seconds. In 1934, 20-year-old Florence Elot was working in the canteen at the House of Commons. She was a keen amateur sprinter, and one of the MPs told her of this tradition. On April the 14th, 1934, Elot decided to give it a go. Other staff gathered to watch, as well as a few members of the press. Elot waited for the chimes at noon and then began to sprint across the bridge. She made it across by the 10th chime, which is about 40 seconds, becoming the first person to beat Big Ben. If Westminster Bridge was a bit longer, Florence Elot might have been just a few seconds off the current world record for the 400 metres. Number 9. Endurance Morris dancing. In 1599, comedy actor William Kemp left William Shakespeare's company after a disagreement. As a publicity stunt, but also as a feat of endurance, he performed a Morris dance between London and Norwich, a distance of 110 miles. Kemp started in the City of London at 7 a.m. on the 26th of February 1599, accompanied by his drummer Michael Chandler, and Londoners gathered to watch him dance his way out of London via Whitechapel and Mile End. It took him 9 days to reach Norwich. Kemp and Chandler were greeted in towns and cities along the route with festivities and refreshments. The folk in Stratford plied them with cream cakes and ale. William Kemp wrote a book about his achievement in 1600, which he entitled 9 Days' Wonder, which is thought to be the origin of that phrase. Number 8. First indoor marathon. On the 18th of December 1909, the first indoor marathon in Britain was held at the Royal Albert Hall. There were only two competitors, C.W. Gardner of England and Dorando Pietri from Italy. Pietri had become popular with Londoners after running in the Olympic Marathon in London in 1908. Pietri crossed the line first, but he'd had to be helped by race officials after collapsing 4 or 5 times in the final stages of the race. Pietri was disqualified after another runner lodged a complaint. But the sympathy of Londoners was with Pietri, and Queen Alexandra sent him a gold cup the next day. In those days, long-distance runners didn't usually drink water. For the Olympic Marathon in 1908, runners were offered champagne, brandy or OXO, so perhaps it's not surprised that Pietri had trouble finishing the race. In 1909, the indoor marathon was set up so the popular Pietri could be seen running again in London. A coconut matting track was laid out at Royal Albert Hall with a military band and an Italian tenor as entertainment for the spectators. Unfortunately, Dorando Pietri's new shoes started giving him blisters after 15 miles, and he had to pull out. Gardner completed the race in 2 hours and 37 minutes. It took him 524 laps, so now they know how many laps it takes to fill the Albert Hall. Number 7. The London Olympics 1866. In 2012, London became the first city to hold the modern Summer Olympics 3 times. The previous Olympics had been in 1908 and 1948. But informal Olympics competitions had taken place in Britain for centuries. The first recorded was the 1612 Cotswolds Olympics, which was a local event. In 1850, the Wenlock Olympics in Shropshire featured a greater variety of events, including cycling on penny farthings. But the first Olympics to invite competitors from all over Britain was actually held in London in 1866 and was called the National Olympian Games. The indoor events were held at German Gymnasium in King's Cross, which had opened in 1864 as one of the world's first purpose-built gymnasiums. One of the regulars at the gym, Hugo Landsberger, excelled on the parallel bars. The swimming events were in the Thames in Teddington. Weather being true to form, though, it rained heavily the entire time. The athletic events were held at Crystal Palace, and a young man called W.G. Grace won the hurdles events, the very same W.G. Grace who went on to make his name as a cricketer. Number 6. Benjamin Franklin's swimming demonstration. In London, the ability to swim was quite unusual. Even the Royal Navy didn't think it was helpful to teach their sailors to swim until the 19th century. Perhaps one of the most famous sailors, Lord Nelson, couldn't swim. There weren't really any clean, safe places to swim until the first swimming pools in the late 18th century. Don't forget the Thames had been London's sewer since the first century was not really a pleasant place for a dip. When Ben Franklin came to live in London, he taught a couple of his friends to swim and even considered opening a swimming school. As he prepared to leave London for the USA in 1726, his friends urged him to make just one more swimming demonstration. Franklin agreed and dived into the River Thames at Chelsea. He swam 3.5 miles to Blackfriars, demonstrating the front crawl, breaststroke and the backstroke. Swimming in London was so unusual that Londoners gathered on the banks to watch him. Many since Franklin have swum in the Thames, particularly after efforts were made in the mid-19th century to clean the water. Although in 1905, Australian swimming champion Annette Kellerman swam 13 miles in the Thames and complained of the flotsam and jetsam she'd had to swim through and the oil that she swallowed. Number 5. The 18th century foot race. Scotland versus Germany. In 1722, a German running footman of the Imperial Ambassador and a Highlander in the service of John Hay, Marquess of Tweedale, were pitted against each other in a race from St. James's Palace in Westminster to the Red Lion Inn in Brentford, West London, and back again to win 50 guineas, which is about £6,000 in today's money. The newspapers reported that the round trip was about 20 miles, and the two runners set out at 10 a.m. on the 19th of December 1722. The Highlander won with a time of 1 hour and 35 minutes. 20 miles is about 32,000 metres, and the current world record for 30,000 metres is just under 1 hour and 46 minutes. So if it had been a couple of centuries later, that unnamed Scotsman might well have been winning medals at modern Olympics. Number 4, the race up the monument. On the 24th of December 1730, a group of men in a tavern in the Old Bailey in the City of London challenged the barman to run up and down the monument in less than 3 minutes. Now, the monument was built by Robert Hooke and Christopher Wren to commemorate the Great Fire of London in 1666. The column is 202 feet tall and it has 311 steps from the bottom to the top. The barman in 1730 took up the challenge, and the occupants of the tavern immediately decamped down the road to the monument. The barman set off and managed to run up and down the 311 steps in 2 minutes and 32 seconds, which was described in a newspaper of the time as an extraordinary performance. This is the first recorded instance of a tower race, where athletes run up tall towers. The first competitive tower race was in 1905 at the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Charity tower runs are now fairly common in London and other cities with skyscrapers. The tallest in London is the Urban Summit Run at the Leadenhall Building, alias the Cheese Grater. Runners have to run 737 feet up 48 floors and 1,250 steps. The current record for the climb is 6 minutes and 30 seconds. Number 3, Eaton versus Harrow cricket match. On the 4th of August 1805, Byron played in the first Eaton versus Harrow cricket match. The two schools have competed every year since. It's one of the world's longest running annual sporting fixtures. The 1805 game was played at Lord's Old Ground. Cricket fan Thomas Lord had opened a cricket ground in 1787 on what is now Dorset Square in Marylebone. The same year the Marylebone Cricket Club was founded at the ground. Conveniently for Thomas Lord, all spectators had to enter the ground through Lord's wine shop until the ground moved to its present site in St. John's Wood. Byron played for Harrow in 1805, although he had somebody to run for him because of a disability in his right foot. Byron bragged about his cricket skills, although the Harrow captain remembered him playing badly and Harrow lost. After the match, the Eatonians and Harrovians went out for dinner together, with some of them getting rather too drunk, and Byron writing in a letter to his brother that he had no idea how he got home because his brain was so much confused by the heat and the wine I drank. Number 2, a 10th century Saxon Triathlon. Devonshire Square, just east of the City of London, is dominated by the statue of a knight. It remembers the original owners of the area, the Knighten Guild. In 960 AD, King Edgar the Peaceful was asked by a guild of 13 knights if they could have some derelict land just to the east of London. King Edgar agreed, but only if the 13 knights each performed 3 duels, one on land, one underground, and one on water, nearly a Saxon version of a triathlon. There are no details, but the duel on land would have been quite straightforward. The underground challenge might have included climbing into a cave, and the duel on water would have perhaps involved swimming, but boat jousts were also fought on the Thames in the medieval period. After the 3 duels, the knights had to hold a joust and defeat anyone who challenged them. The Saxon version of a medal table hasn't survived, but the Knighton Guild must have been successful because they were the original holders of the land and established a vineyard on the site. Number 1. Joust on London Bridge. On the 23rd of April 1390, the sporting event of the year took place on London Bridge when Lord Wells, the English ambassador to Scotland, challenged a Scottish noble, Sir David Lindsay, to a friendly joust. The Scotsman chose the date, St. George's Day. The Englishman chose the location, London Bridge. This was the medieval London Bridge, by the way, which actually had houses on it, and was one of the most famous locations in England at the time. At the time, some of the buildings on the bridge were being rebuilt, so the construction site was transformed into a tournament ground for the joust. The bridge was decorated with blue and red banners and flags, and the residents and shopkeepers on the bridge rented out space in their buildings for spectators. A grandstand covered in cloth of gold was constructed so that King Richard II would have the best view. The 2 competitors arrived on the bridge together, Lindsay wearing blue and white, and Wells wearing the symbol of the White Hart. To the cheers of the crowds, the knights charged at one another 3 times. On the 3rd time, Wells was thrown from his horse and injured, and David Lindsay was declared the winner. Like a good sportsman, the Scotsman jumped from his horse to make sure his opponent was okay. With the joust over and the injured Wells on his way home, the spectators charged the field to take splinters of lance as souvenirs.